I wanted to give you a little background on what I've been doing the rest of my life, because I am 47 years old, so, and starting this career pretty late in my life. So it's kind of, you know, what did she do before that and why is she doing this now? So just a little brief about me. I studied 4 years of undergraduate in psychology at St. Mary's University. And during that time I volunteered at the IWK's psychiatric ward for 3 years. I was offered a job there with community services, and so I followed clients home to foster care and spent time with them and then reported back to their social workers. I also worked for RRSS, Regional Residential Services Society, so that's group homes for adults with mentally challenged adults. They changed that term a lot. As a counselor's assistant, so we did a lot of behavioral stuff there. And what you may not know about me is that I suffered from social anxiety since the age of 5. That's when I started to remember it anyway. In 1994, I couldn't leave my apartment, so I developed agoraphobia. And in 95, I finally got help, which was psychologist and a psychiatrist, and it was really great, but there was something missing. There was just something missing. I was going along, but there's something missing, and it was my connection to my body. I had no connection to my body whatsoever. I lost that, so I didn't feel that I had control over my life anymore, right? So yoga was the missing piece for me. So I believed in it so much that I dropped a 10-year career as a dental assistant. I left my own decorating business, which was successful, and I started to become trained as a yoga therapist. Taking quite a gamble because it's a relatively new, 5,000 years old, but new to us, new field. So how did I become a yoga therapist? I trained at an accredited school in the U.S. for 3 years. Then I did a 1,000-hour mentorship under the supervision of Andrea Cook and Genevieve Yellen. So it was both formal education and also clinical experience. I've done extensive studies in trauma-informed yoga therapy, anxiety and depression, and working with children. I am actually faculty for the trauma-informed yoga therapy program that is in U.S. and Canada, in Mexico, and going to Europe. And I sit on the Yoga Therapy Advisory Board for research that is happening at the University of North Carolina to test the efficacy of the protocol that I use. So I've seen the evidence actually happen in other people too. I've heard them actually say the words, "This is the missing piece." You know, this has been the missing piece. I haven't known what to do. So saying that, it works really well with psychotherapy, right? And also with medications. It's not just, you know, coming in here necessarily. Some people are ready to come in here. But I always, if someone comes in from out of the office, I'm always looking for a psychologist for them, because I want somebody to be seeing a psychologist as well as seeing me, because there's two parts to this whole thing, right? And I can't process any of the information that they're giving me. I do active listening, so I'm listening to them, I'm mirroring back what they're saying, and they're basically, you know, coming up with their own conclusions. But I suggest, well, maybe you'll talk to a psychologist about this if they don't have one already. So yoga at its roots is actually a science of the mind. And what does yoga mean? Does anybody know?
Yeah, it's mind-body
Close. Yeah, it means to yoke or to bring together and make whole.
Oh.
Okay, so that is mind and body, right? Creating the whole. So we look at the whole individual as yoga therapists. We're trained to look at the whole entire individual. So we look at the breath and energy body, so the breath patterns that we see. We look at the psycho-emotional, what's happening in their lives. Are they depressed, anxious? Can they not sleep? Are they having cravings? Are they angry? That type of thing. And we also look at their physical body, so not just looking at it from a point of function, but also looking at it emotionally. So seeing, where emotion can be held in the body. And we'll get to that later. So, this is what yoga therapy is. It's an accredited profession regulated by International Association of Yoga Therapists. It's implementation of evidence-based yoga practices. Not all of it is yoga practices, but they're definitely not the yoga practices that you see on TV, on the internet, and on Instagram. Different. We empower individuals to move toward health. So it's really a wellness model rather than focusing on pathology. And then it's an intense form of biofeedback and self-regulation. So over the years, I've gotten to learn the scientific terms to replace the Sanskrit woo-woo terms, right? Because you can't break into this world by using those types of terms, because it just goes over people's heads and then they're back here, right? First thing that I do is get them to fill out a personal history intake, and that's where I get the psycho-emotional side, as much as I need to know. We don't need to get into the stories and everything that happened. If people start to talk, I'll give them a few minutes to share, and I'll listen actively, and then we'll start directing it right into the body. So where do you feel that in your body? Right? So it's all body focused. We do a breath assessment. 95% of the people that come in here have a breath pattern dysfunction. Okay, so what does that mean? They're not using their diaphragm muscle. So they're starting to either do reverse breathing. So when you inhale, you want the abdomen to rise, and they would be breathing sort of in, it's hard to even do, but inhaling chest and then exhaling stomach. Or there's no movement at all, it's frozen, you cannot see anything. So what's happening then is that they are breathing in the chest, they're recruiting the scalene muscles here, and if you hold your hands in toward your scalene muscles, do it now, try it, and then go, see how they activate it? See how they activate it?
Yeah.
Those are activated all the time for people that are chest breathers. Okay? Those muscles are setting off stress hormones in their bodies. So by the way people are breathing, just by breathing, they are continuously feeding the sympathetic loop. Okay? And what else does that do? It adds a lot of tension. So I think everybody who has anxiety, trauma, anything that's going on has a lot of tension in their neck and shoulders, right? They'll often complain about that. So then we'll do a posture assessment. So like I said, we're looking at, you can see different things. So we know, this posture, right? So that's the red light reflex. So when we're afraid, our stomach muscles contract and we fold forward, our chest collapses, it's harder to breathe. We bend our knees and our elbows are bent, and then we end up with chronic pain, and we think it's just because we're getting old. Okay? So all of these things we're feeding the stress response. So the muscle tension that you see too, like this, that's feeding the stress response. And then we start to unwind these people when they come in here, and I'll tell you how we do that in a sec. We look at self-regulation education and practice. Which ways can they start to learn to self-regulate in different circumstances? Collaborate together on planning what type of format is going to work for you. How do you want to do this at home? Here are some sheets where you can read it, practice it at home. How much time do you want to put into it so that it doesn't overwhelm them? So they're part of the whole thing too, which is giving them back some of that control. Self-exploration, so body scanning, going through, people have divorced themselves from their bodies. They live up here in their heads. I can't stop thinking, I can't sleep at night, That is because there is no mind-body connection, right? The nervous system travels into the whole body. I'm always saying that, look, the nervous system isn't just up here. It is affecting the rest of us. And so we're looking at the self-exploration in that way, like how much body awareness do I have? And people are really surprised at the lack of body awareness. And then when they start to gain body awareness, it gives them a real sense of, and again, the control, but also feeling more grounded and more centered in themselves and less kind of foreign. Deep relaxation, so we learn to relax deeply. We do somatic yoga therapy. So what is self-regulation? I'm sure you guys know, but from my point of view, I look at it as physiologically, so the ability to reduce and stop those effects of the stress response before it rises into fight or flight. So learning tools to intercept and bring yourself closer to the relaxation response rather than going into fight or flight. And then eventually we train the brain to go toward that way. Emotionally, so it's the ability to pick yourself up when you're down, and calm yourself when you're activated. And then behaviorally, to act in one's own best interest, so making good choices includes, controlling rage and stuff like that. So we downregulate. We talk a lot about that. We need to calm this enraged, angry, frustrated, terrified person down. But there's also upregulation. So if people are frozen, depressed, dissociated, or sad, any of those, there are methods to upregulate. So if a person is up here, hyper aroused, you cannot say to them, practice mindfulness or do some meditation or do a little bit of breathing. They're not going to be able to do that. So you need to meet them where they are. So we do active practices where you're actually burning off the stress hormones first and refocusing your thoughts, and then you slowly bring yourself down into relaxation, and that gets easier over time with practice. And then upregulation, same thing, depressed, dissociative, just not even in the room. You're going to say to them, okay, so let's stand up and do, some sun salutations. They're not there, right? So you need to really focus on the parts of the body that are most easily felt. So like the hands, the feet, the lips, the tongue, those areas, to get right into that sensory motor cortex. So it's a skill set of tools that facilitates integration between top-down and bottom-up mechanisms. So the top-down for yoga therapy would be mindfulness. So you do mindfulness. Bidirectional feedback with the sensory and motor. So you're using both sensory and motor nerves at the same time, which has an overall calming effect. Improvement in proprioception, so actually getting to know your body in space, Some people, if you put a ball behind their back and tell them to stand against the ball, can you feel the ball? No, right? There is no sensation, so they're not connected. And so improving that, improving balance, coordination, and agility, and then interoceptive processing input. So viscerosensory and chemosensory stuff. So we do a lot of different things. And research suggests, and we've seen this a lot actually, that it helps, self-regulation helps to solidify the therapeutic changes for better long-term results. Okay? A shorter period in time in psychological treatment and a possible prevention of relapses. So what happens is the client learns to self-regulate, so when they're in the room with the psychologist, they're more present and they're able to do more processing because they're able to bring themselves down. So the psychologist doesn't have to spend all of their time trying to bring this person down, right? I also do somatic yoga therapy. So you will never catch me in here stretching with people, okay? You wouldn't expect that, right? Because yoga is stretching. Well, what they found is that when we stretch, the muscles go directly back to where they were. Okay, so for people that have chronically contracted muscles, stretching them will feel good initially, but my teacher said Coca-Cola feels good while it's going down, but it's not necessarily good for you. So do your stretching first and then do your somatics, right? So it's actually working with the nervous system. Everything that we do in here is working with the nervous system. We're doing neuromuscular movement re-education, so teaching the muscles that are contracted that they can slowly release. And how you do that is you contract into a contraction. So if I had a lumbar curve like this, that way my back would be contracted, you would think, well, you want to stretch and do a forward fold. Well, yes, that will feel good and that'll, for the time being, but it's not going to go away. So in order to teach those muscles to actually relax to the length that they can, you contract into the contraction and then slowly release it. And because we're moving slowly, we're getting to that part of the brain that we're not just doing it calisthenically, right? So if we're moving fast, we're using the cerebellum and we're just doing it. Cirque du Soleil. So they can actually regain control of muscles that have been involuntarily and chronically contracted due to injuries, surgeries, major illnesses, repetitive emotional and physical stress. And then by improving this connection between the mind and body, people learn to regain control. I also do the Overcome Anxiety Clinic. I haven't done one in a little while, but I've taken that into schools and universities and corporate and PTSD groups. So it's learning to break the cycle.
And that's where you have the really structured protocols.
Yeah. So we have the structured protocol with that. They get a manual, they take it home. But when I'm working one-on-one, I'm basically using the same type of stuff, but it's tailored specifically to the individual. So Andrea.
Is this my part now? I can talk?
Yeah.
That's great. So is my whiteboard thing on?
Okay, I'm going to move slightly over this way. There we go.
Oops, sorry. Jumping over people. Where'd my markers go? So basically what happens when I meet with a client, obviously we do our initial assessment, so we find out what's going on with them and what they need treatment for and whatever. And usually after a session or two, we see a bit of a pattern as far as their activation level, right? So if it's trauma, which is most of them, I generally go over kind of their activation level with them. So anytime I'm doing therapy, I want them to be working within a certain window of tolerance. So they need to feel comfortable, but they need to feel like they're engaged. So I don't want them up here, but I don't want them down here. I want them to be nice and consistently in here. As per Pat Ogden would say. So we do a lot of work as far as just body scanning and breathing and kind of doing some somatic stuff as well in psychotherapy, but if they need that extra work, I generally consult with Kayla. So I'll send them in for the free half-an-hour consultation for them to come in, and Kaylin will do her assessment, and then we'll kind of go back and forth as far as what the client needs. So the client decides, yes, I'd love to come see Kaylin, great, that's awesome. The client comes in to see me usually first, when we have their day, I see what's going on, we might do some mindful cognitive behavioral work, we might do some trauma processing. I can see how activated, trying to keep them here all day, but if they've been jacking up all day, I'll come in and talk to Kaylin and I'll say, the person's really, really up today, like, can you work on kind of getting them down a little bit? So she'll give them some tools next time they come in. Generally, they have those tools in their pocket, so we can keep them more efficiently into this place. So when we first start working with the client, we get them to fill out certain questionnaires. We have the Beck Depression Inventory, Beck Anxiety Inventory, the Post-Trauma Checklist or Symptom Scale. And we monitor that throughout their progress with both of us. Usually, what do we check? You usually tell me if they're up or down or what the symptoms are doing. Mm-hmm. What we generally see in all of the results is the depression generally improves within 1 or 2 sessions. So right away they're feeling more in control of things. They feel like they can take away some stuff and work on their bodies, and they're more engaged. So we see a pretty standard decrease. I'm doing that for decrease as far as depressive symptoms. What we have seen, though, is usually by session 3 or 4 that there is an intensification a little bit in their symptoms. So if they are in for trauma, there might be a little bit of an increase in their overall trauma and anxiety. It's because they're actually finally dealing with stuff. So they might have been almost like denying a lot of stuff. Now they can actually deal with the trauma, and more often than not, they return to